Ever wonder how Philippine law handles the traditions of indigenous groups, especially when it comes to things like, I don't know, inheritance?
It's a question a lot of countries grapple with, actually. Finding that balance between respecting cultural practices and upholding a national legal system.
Right, because you want to honor those traditions, but also ensure everyone's treated equally under the law. So today we're diving into a case that tackles this very issue.
And it involves the Ibaloi people of the Philippines. A fascinating case. Really digs into where those lines blur between custom and law.
We're talking about the 2021 Supreme Court decision in the case of Anaban v. Anaban, right?
That's the one.
From what I've read, it gets pretty complex. Family dynamics, inheritance disputes, and at the heart of it all, the recognition of indigenous customs.
It all boils down to one question. Can a divorce, granted according to Ibaloi customs, hold up in a Philippine court?
So bigger than just one family's drama, then.
Oh, absolutely. This case has implications for how indigenous traditions are viewed and integrated within the Philippine legal system. It touches on some pretty fundamental ideas about cultural identity.
Okay, well, before we get lost in the weeds, let's back up a bit. Who are the main players in this legal saga?
Well, it all revolves around a man named Pedrito Anaban, a member of the Ibaloi indigenous group. And Pedrito, he was married twice.
Twice. Okay, so already we're getting into some interesting territory. Tell me more.
His first marriage was to a woman named Virginia. Together they had 3 children. But according to court documents, Virginia experienced some mental health challenges, which ultimately led to a divorce in 1947.
1947, so quite a while ago. And this divorce, it was sanctioned by the Ibaloi Council of Elders, right?
That's right. Recognized within the Ibaloi community.
But would a Philippine court see it the same way back then? That's the question, isn't it?
It is. And it gets even more complicated because Pedrito later married another woman, also from the Ibaloi tribe, named Papang.
Okay, and they had children as well.
They did. 8 children together. So we're talking about a large family, multiple marriages, and a whole lot of potential for conflict, especially when you consider that Pedrito's second marriage to Papang, while considered legitimate by the Ibaloi, well, it directly challenges the understanding of what constitutes a legal marriage under Philippine law.
Ah, and I'm guessing this is where the inheritance battle comes into play.
Exactly. When Pedrito passed away in 2004, it triggered a legal battle over his estate.
So you have Virginia's children who likely believed their parents' marriage was the only legally valid one in the eyes of Philippine law going up against
Papang's children, who firmly believed their parents' marriage was just as legitimate, based on Ibaloi traditions, it became a clash between 2 understandings of family and marriage.
a family divided, each side convinced of their rightful claim. This whole case must have been a roller coaster ride through the Philippine court system.
Oh, it was. Multiple appeals, each one adding another layer to this question of how we reconcile cultural practices with a national legal framework. And as we'll unpack further, the interpretation of existing laws, like Article 78 of the old Civil Code, which touches on recognizing indigenous marriages, becomes central to the case.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's delve into those court decisions and see how this all played out. So this inheritance dispute with these 2 different ideas of what makes a marriage valid, where did it land first in the court system?
The first stop was the Municipal Circuit Trial Court, the MCTC as it's known,
Okay, the MCTC, got it.
and they actually ruled in favor of Papang's children.
Oh, interesting. So they recognized the Ibaloi divorce as legitimate. That's a win for recognizing those cultural traditions, right?
Yeah, it was a significant victory for them at that stage. The MCTC really emphasized the importance of respecting the Ibaloi's own internal systems for handling these matters.
Yeah, it makes sense to honor those traditions, especially when they've been in place for so long.
Their reasoning was basically this. The Ibaloi, through their Council of Elders, they have this established system for marriage and divorce. And since they use this system to address Pedrito and Virginia's situation, it should hold weight.
Seems pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing Virginia's children weren't ready to give up their claim just yet?
No,
Huh?
absolutely not. This is just the beginning.
Appeals court, here we come.
Exactly. Virginia's children appealed the MCTC's decision and took the case to the Regional Trial Court, the RTC.
RTC, got it. Another level up the legal ladder.
And at the RTC level, things took a turn.
Oh, they didn't see eye to eye with the MCTC on this whole honoring Ibaloi traditions thing?
Not quite. The RTC actually overturned the MCTC's ruling and declared Pedrito's second marriage to Papang void.
Wow, talk about a reversal. So instead of respecting Ibaloi tradition, they basically said, nope, doesn't count under Philippine law. What was their reasoning there?
Well, This is where the interpretation of Philippine law, specifically Article 78 of the old Civil Code, takes center stage.
Because Article 78, that's the one that deals with recognizing indigenous marriage practices.
Exactly. The RTC pointed out that while Article 78 allows for recognizing marriages performed according to indigenous customs, it doesn't specifically mention anything about recognizing divorces done the same way.
So a very literal interpretation of the law then. Kind of a classic case of the written word versus cultural practice.
Precisely. The RTC's stance was that recognizing a customary divorce without a clear legal framework could lead to inconsistencies and muddy the waters when it comes to applying the law consistently.
So they were prioritizing that consistent across-the-board application of the law, even if it meant potentially clashing with long-held traditions.
That's one way to look at it. And to further support their decision, they brought up a case from 1933, People v. Bitdu.
People v. Bitdu. What was that all about?
It involved a similar question of whether a divorce granted based on religious customs held up in Philippine courts.
So they were setting a precedent back then.
In a way, yes.
Right.
And in that case, the court ruled that the religious divorce didn't have legal weight.
Interesting how a case from decades ago can still be relevant today.
Legal precedents, they have a way of echoing through time, don't they? But even with that RTC decision, Pepeng's children weren't giving up.
Oh, I bet they weren't. Where do they go from there?
They appealed to the Court of Appeals.
Making their way up the legal ladder one step at a time.
Yeah.
And did the Court of Appeals offer any hope? Or were they sticking with the RTC's interpretation?
No dice for Pepeng's children there. The Court of Appeals sided with the RTC, upholding the decision that the Ibaloi divorce didn't hold legal water.
So twice now, a Philippine court essentially said that no matter what the Ibaloi community recognizes, the existing law just doesn't have a clear way to acknowledge divorces that happen outside the court system.
It was a tough break for them, for sure. But it really highlights how crucial the wording of the law is, how these cases often hinge on the interpretation of a single sentence or phrase.
So what happens next? Did they throw in the towel or did they take this all the way to the top?
They were determined, so yes, the case, it landed at the highest court in the land. The Philippine Supreme Court.
The stakes just got real.
That's an understatement.
So the big question for the Supreme Court, can a custom like divorce, so deeply rooted in Ibaloi tradition, find a place within the Philippine legal system, even if it's not explicitly spelled out in the letter of the law?
It's a question with huge implications, not just for the Anaban family, but for how indigenous customs are treated within the legal system as a whole.
And which side they choose, that decision could have ripple effects for years to come.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pivotal moment for sure.
So the case lands on the Supreme Court's doorstep. Big moment for the Anaban family, big moment for Ibaloi traditions. Was there any wiggle room in the law? Any other legal arguments they considered?
Well, Pepeng's children certainly hope so. They brought up the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, the IPRA.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's the whole point of the IPRA, right? To protect and recognize indigenous cultures and traditions.
Exactly. They argued that the IPRA